Good morning and welcome to another edition of Good Morning Trinidad and Tobago. I'm Vina Bharat. Remember, we're also on Talk City 91.1 FM and online at ctvtt.com. Well, today we continue to look at areas in the budget as government prepares to present its package next Monday. Today we address two areas specifically: the adjustment to stamp duty regime to enhance efficiency of the real estate market and the land tax as a long-term fiscal measure for the agricultural and residential properties. Now, the tax manager at Deloitte and member of the Institute of Chartered Accountants is Mr. Shivanan Deopersad. Good morning. How are you doing?
Good morning. I'm fine.
So we have a lot to discuss this morning, and I'd just like to start off a little bit with this land tax regime, this new dimension. Tell us a little bit about it.
Well, it all stems from what I understand, that the Property Tax Act, the Property Tax Act was made into law back in 2009. It was deferred, the implementation was deferred to 2016. But unfortunately, it appears that the government has had some difficulty in implementation of the property tax regime, which is in law. And it appears that as a temporary measure, they wish to implement a land tax, which, from what I've seen, is based on a fixed set of rates for certain sizes of property. From what I've seen, I believe it's $350 for one 5,000 square foot lot of land. And the scale is a fixed scale going up from there. So it's really it is said to be a short-term measure. And what I wanted to speak about today is that land tax is not necessarily a tax that could only be looked at as a short-term measure, but it could very well be a part of a long-term solution. And the reason for that is because one of the key impediments to implementation of the property tax is the fact of building out a valuation rule. Now, to value properties, property tax assesses the tax on the value of land, as well as structures, buildings, and other structures affixed to the land, including plant and machinery.
And location as well, to some extent.
Sorry?
Location as well?
Well, location impacts the value of the property.
Right.
So therefore, each property theoretically would need to be assessed. Every person's home, and office and everything would need to be assessed. And that would be, could be quite labor intensive, right? So what I'm saying is that rather than, assess every individual property, residential property, agricultural property, as well as commercial and industrial, I would say let's keep the base, the property tax base for structures and buildings, for industrial as well as commercial, where you tend to have the higher value properties. And for residential and agricultural, only apply the property tax to the value of land as if it was vacant land. Because the Property Tax Act and the Valuation of Land Act currently has a formula for arriving at an annual rental value for vacant land. And what I'm saying is that why not apply that formula to all residential properties and agricultural properties? And the advantage of using that already existing formula would be to simplify the building out of the valuation rule, as well as maintenance of the valuation rule. Now, of course, there would be some high-value residential properties, but most residential properties would not be as valuable as commercial properties and industrial properties, where you get the most of your tax take. So therefore, by having the system where you can update, which enables you to maintain a more up-to-date valuation rule, will over time enable the government to maintain its tax base. Now let us go back to the old Land and Buildings Tax Act. Now, one of the big reasons why the tax take under that regime eroded was because the valuation rule was not maintained. And so therefore, we can see that it may not be practical to say that we're going to value every residential property every 3 years, because a previous regime fell through because that couldn't really be done, right? So this is a suggestion to make it more practical.
All right, so in terms of revenue, how much revenue is government expected to gain from this?
Well, the previous estimate is roughly $500 million. And what I'm saying is that if you maintain the base for the industrial and commercial properties, you should be able to maintain that revenue stream. And in fact, you can, over time, enhance the revenue stream because you can sustain revaluing the properties every 3 years. And once you can sustain that, then you can ultimately increase that revenue take as properties appreciate in value.
Now, this, like the other, even the property tax, the issue is transparency. And where does the money go? We understand that the money may go to the consolidated fund, which it may just be lost.
Well, I don't know if it's lost, but I mean, assuming that the funds will be as well treated as all the other funds that currently go, like for example, payroll tax and so on. You know, a lot of people pay payroll tax. Practically everyone pays value-added tax. It goes into that same pool. Now, ideally, property tax should be assessed at a local level, and one could advocate that it should really be collected at the regional authority level and also managed at that level, because it's those regional authorities that would have the best on-the-ground knowledge, and also it would make the regional authorities more accountable to the residents of those areas. And it can create some interesting situations where you can have well-run regional authorities and not so well-run regional authorities. Sometimes the better schools can be in the more well-run ones. And for example, it's quite common in places in the United States, people seek out places where there's higher property tax because the schools tend to be better, right? And the infrastructure tends to be better. So therefore, when you delegate the tax to the regional authorities and you have some doing better than others, then in a sense it democratizes the tax, because now I can choose where I want to live. Do I want to live where I pay more but I get better services, or I pay less and the services may not be so good?
All right, let's talk a little bit about the implementation and timing. Do you think the timing is appropriate?
I think so, because we are in this recession, and the reason for the recession we're in is because we, as a country, we rely on foreign exchange and on government revenue from the energy sector to fund recurrent expenditure. And that is the fundamental reason why we're in this recession. Now, let us contrast that with Australia. Australia is a major commodity exporter. Now, commodity prices across the board collapsed in late 2014. So that would have affected Australia. But Australia has not been in a recession since 1991, right? How has Australia achieved that? It's because it has a highly diversified economy. It exports educational services. It's a hub for people to study there. Tourism and manufacturing, highly diversified. And how did it get there is by focusing on ensuring that it can pay its bills based on the non-energy revenue, right?
All right. Now, the impact that this can have on the man on the streets. I know you said the timing is actually good, but let's talk about the impact on the man on the street. Do you think, how do you think he would fare with this new tax?
Well, the thing about a property tax or a land tax is that it, like VAT, it reaches both the formal and informal sectors. Now, the alternative to a land tax or property tax is to increase tax on the formal sector, and that would place a disproportionate burden on people with formal employment, public servants, and so on. While a tax like this has a broader base and in that sense is more equitable.
Okay, so let's chat a little bit about stamp duty. Are we getting value for money for the stamp duty that we're paying?
Well, my understanding is that stamp duty goes into the consolidated fund.
Okay.
And an argument against stamp duty is that it increases the cost of persons trading in property, and quite often people trade in property, particularly residential property, when you want to have a family and so on, and you want to get a bigger property, and also when people are nearing retirement and they want to monetize the equity in their property, where they may have a 3-bedroom house, a 5-bedroom house, and they may want just to go to a 2-bedroom, and therefore get some of that equity out to pay for their retirement and medical expenses and so on. But if you have a substantial stamp duty, that discourages the seller, They say, why should I sell and pay X percentage? Now, what I'm proposing here is that the rate should be reduced, but not just a broad reduction, but to introduce what I would call a register, where similar in concept to a stock exchange, where when you sell your property, you register it on a public online register. And as long as you register the sale on that register, then you can get a reduced rate of stamp duty. And the argument for that is that once you have enough properties, sales of properties registered on a public register, there's more transparency in the market regarding real estate prices. And when you have more transparency in the market, it makes it easier for property developers to look at that point of reference and plan for future development and so on, and it could encourage construction and more availability of homes.
Now, there have been issues brought up in the public space about rampant fraud in land registry.
Yeah.
Do you have any comments on that?
I don't have any specific comments on that. I think that's more of a legal issue.
Okay, and people caught with fake deeds that sold property they did not own to innocent people. How do we deal with that?
Well, I think one of the intentions of the property tax regime is to make it a little more difficult to carry out that kind of fraud, because up to 2009, it was standard practice that you had to produce a land and building tax receipt in order to sell your property. So that was a layer of control in relation to proof of ownership. But as that control fell away, it may have made fraud a little easier.
Okay.
Yeah.
But don't you think that these issues should be dealt with before we make any moves to adjust stamp duty?
I don't think one necessarily connects with the next. I think that stamp duty. I think the regime for stamping a property must remain. So it's not to remove stamp duty, but to apply stamp duty may be at a rate of 0%. But there should be that control there.
So what update can you provide us with in terms of property tax?
Well, really and truly is what's in the public domain now regarding this temporary land tax. That is next move. I understand that the property tax should be brought back in stream in 2019, but it's basically what we've seen in the public domain.
All right, and today that the government is having a conversation spotlight focusing on finance. Would Deloitte or ICAT be offering suggestions?
I'm not aware of there being a direct presence in those discussions.
Okay, all right, great. Anything that you'd like to add before we wrap?
No, I would say that in order to get out of this recession, that we should focus on making our non-energy sector fiscally self-sustainable. And two key pillars in that is to broaden the tax base to improve ease of doing business.
Okay, great. It was a pleasure having you on this morning.
Great, no problem. Thanks.